All right. So, hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Book Cafe podcast. In today's episode, we will be talking about this book right here behind me entitled Parveen Babi, A Life. And I'm extremely excited to speak to Parveen's biographer, Ms. Karishma Upadhyay, in today's episode to talk about the book. But just before that, if you are watching this episode on YouTube, do please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. And if you are listening to this on Apple's podcast, Google Podcast, or Spotify, do please continue to download and support the show because we are going to have a lot more content added very soon. And in fact, it's fair to say that we have new content added all the time. But as far as this particular episode is concerned, let me first do my due diligence by welcoming the author herself, Ms. Karishma Upadhyay. So, hi, Karishma. Welcome to Book Cafe Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you about the book.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for making the time to speak to us today. So, Karishma, we here at Book Cafe Podcast love to know about our authors as much as we love to know about the books that we're discussing. So, for our viewers and listeners who may not have read the book yet and who might be discovering you as well for the very first time, do please take this opportunity to tell us just a little bit about yourself, like your cultural and ethnic background, where you grew up, what you do for a living, and in fact, anything at all that you'd like to share with us.
Thanks, Omar. So essentially, I've been a journalist, a film journalist for about over 20 years. I've written for pretty much every single mainstream publication there is here in India. My interest in movies kind of came very late. I discovered movies very late because my parents weren't very interested in them. But once I did, I think I was in college and I pretty much fell completely in love with them. My father was in the Indian Navy, so we've kind of lived all over the place. I finished, my education in Delhi before I moved to Mumbai to study journalism.
Mhm.
And that's where I pretty much worked until before the pandemic. So yeah, so I've been writing about movies for about 20 years. I don't do reviews, but actor interviews, columns, just all of that kind of stuff. And so when when the opportunity to write this book came along, I had actually never thought I would write a book. I looked it up. I looked at it as like just an extended journalistic piece. And I think that's been my approach even for the second book that I'm working on, where I really enjoy the research, meeting people, getting to know about, one person that I didn't know much about. Like I didn't know about Parveen when I started. I knew her songs, I knew her films, but that was pretty much it. For some reason, I hadn't paid attention to all the tabloid news that she'd made through her career. So yeah, so it gave me a chance to kind of research from scratch, to kind of understand and get to know a person through what people around her thought of her.
Mhm.
So yeah, so that's pretty much about me.
Absolutely, and yeah, and thank you so much for sharing. So you actually, preempted my next question, which was that since you are involved with film journalism, do you do film reviews? But you've already answered that question, so yes, thank you. Krisha, my next question would be with regards to the book itself. So Parveen Babi, as a lot of our viewers and listeners who are Bollywood buffs or buffs of Indian film cinema would definitely be familiar with Parveen Babi as a starlet of the 1970s and 80s. But she did, in fact, pass away a long time back in 2005. So why now? Why write a book about Parveen Babi? And why did you take up this project in the first place, some 18 years after she had passed away? If you can just help us understand that.
It wasn't my idea. I have to be honest with you. Publishers, an editor at Hatchet got in touch with me via some friends asking me if I'd be interested in writing a book. And so when they mentioned Parveen, one of the first things I did, which is not something that people should do, is I looked up Wikipedia because like I said, I didn't really know much about her life. And then there were some things that kind of stood out for me. The fact that she'd left the industry twice and managed to come back to the industry pretty much at the same level that she'd left it at, which in the 20 years that I'd spent in the industry, I knew was something that didn't happen. it's an industry which is very small, very and not very forgiving of people who make mistakes. Especially women, and especially at that time. So if you left for whatever reason, you would have to struggle to kind of, make a comeback, as they say. Whereas every single time she came back with like the biggest films and, working with the biggest directors. So that caught my attention. And then, of course, there was the bit about, her having been on the cover of Time magazine. Again, this wasn't a time when the West was very aware of our film industry. So for her to have, been on the cover of Time magazine was a fairly big deal. It still continues to be a big deal. And then, and then there was the mental health issue. The fact that, somebody had made multiple films on what he saw of her life, which was Mahesh Bhatt, of course.
Yeah.
So these were all just very interesting, little bits that kind of intrigued me, and I was like, oh, maybe I'd want to know more about her. And of course, I have this one friend who's been in the industry for 1,000 years, who jumped when I told him that I'd got this opportunity, because he's like, you've got to write this book, like you've got to research her. Yeah, and that's how I got started. So there was no obvious trigger, except for these people coming and saying, oh,
Yeah.
she looks like an interesting person, would you write about her?
For sure, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, I have had the opportunity to read the book. And in fact, it was my wife, Jennifer, who actually recommended the book to me because she's the Bollywood buff in our family. I have also found it to be a very riveting read. And of course, the character of Parveen herself is so complex, and there's so many nuances, and there's so many ways that you can look at it, that it really is a life worth reading about, I have to say. So we definitely have to thank your team at Hatchet who commissioned you for the book, Karishma, because I think that it's a story that the world needed to hear, especially one of the things I really loved about the book was the lens of mental health through which you looked at her life and her career. So I think that's really something that we definitely have to come back to. But before we get into all of that, Karishma, let me just take you back a little bit to 1954, the year of Parveen's birth. Can you tell us a little bit about her early life? What kind of family did Parveen actually come from? Did she come from a aristocratic background, or was it a very middle class family that she came from? Where did she really come from? So if you could just help us understand a bit more about her origins.
Before I talk about Parveen's early years, I have to thank Jennifer for liking and recommending the book. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm so glad you enjoyed it as well. So Parveen was born in, her father was a part of the Junagadh royalty. She was born in a small town called Junagadh, which is close to the Pakistan border in Gujarat. And her father worked in the court of the Nawab of Junagadh. Her mother, she was the only child. She was born like decades after her parents had, been married. So like a lot of people just called her the miracle baby, because they didn't expect to have any other kids. By that point, her mother was almost 40 when she was born. Her childhood was fairly lonely because, like I said, she was the only child. And so she spent most of it kind of reading a lot, spending time with herself. She had a few friends in the neighborhood where she grew up, but by and large, it was a fairly lonely childhood for her.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, and as you rightly said in the book, I mean, I think her father was in his 60s by the time she was born, and her mom was also in her late 30s. So that she really was the miracle child for her parents. So,
Mm.
with regards to and I have to say something else, Karishma. As you know, that our show is based in Dhaka, Bangladesh. So you can imagine my surprise that just 34 pages into the book Bangladesh does get a mention in the book, and so I always try and link up whatever I can with regards to Bangladesh and the person of the book that we're discussing. So, can you help us understand what exactly was the role that the Bangladesh Liberation War had on Perveen's life, And if you can just share that with us, we'd be really thrilled to hear about it. So very early on.
Omar, I have to tell you this bit of information when I got and when I managed to corroborate it with other people and it was confirmed, it blew my mind because I did not expect it.
Hmm.
So essentially, Parveen joined college, much to the surprise of everyone who knew her because her mother agreed to send her to college to Ahmedabad. But one of her mother's conditions was that you will get married as soon as possible. And Parveen being, I mean, she was a young girl. She was about 15 when she joined college. She said, yeah, I mean, I'll do whatever you say, but as long as you let me go to college.
Hmm.
Um, Her mother Jamal found a match for Parveen in Pakistan. He was an airline pilot. He flew for Pakistan Airlines, and they got engaged in Karachi. It was a big affair. He even his name was Jamil, and he even came down to India to meet to Ahmedabad to meet Parveen's friends. They wrote to each other. This continued for like about a year. And around about that time is when Pakistan, which was East and West Pakistan, and the war started, and India got involved. And Jamal, her mother, was worried about the strained diplomatic relationships between Pakistan and India.
Right.
And so she broke off the engagement without telling Parveen,
Mm. Right.
which was a huge, huge setback to her because this was a girl of 15 who had kind of fallen in love and imagined a whole life with this man, only to get a postcard from her mother like one fine day that said, your engagement's over.
Mm. Yeah.
um in the questions that you send me, you mentioned if this is something that kind of it could have completely changed Parveen's life. She would have never been an actor. She would have never lived on her own.
Hmm.
So who knows what her life would have been if she did eventually get married to if she had gotten married to Jamil.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I must say that it was a shock to me as well as to Jennifer, and I'm sure it must have been a very interesting bit of information for all our viewers and listeners in Bangladesh as well. That had it not been for the 1971 Liberation War, we may never have gotten Parveen Babi. Maybe she would have emigrated to Pakistan and she would have just lived her life out, as a normal human being rather than the starlet that she would eventually go on to become in Bollywood. But
Yeah.
Krishma, just coming back to her relationship, and you mentioned that it was her mom, Jamal, who actually broke off the engagement. So what exactly was Parveen's relationship like with her mother? And was it fair for her to have done such a thing without Parveen's consent? So how would you look at it?
I mean, we're pretty much the same kind of people on both sides of the border. So you would know that it's very common for parents not to consult their children,
Hmm.
even with matters as important as this. Having said that, Jamal and Parveen didn't really have the best mother-daughter relationship. Like I mentioned earlier, Jamal was a lot older, compared to the average mother. I mean, she was in her 40s when Parveen was born, and they kind of just never, like, from what I've been told, she didn't really have that maternal instinct.
Hmm.
Um, and so even when Parveen grew up and they started working, when she had her mental health issues, um, she didn't lean on her mother, as much as one would have thought, considering it was just the two of
Yeah,
them. Her
absolutely.
father had passed away when she was much younger,
Yeah.
but they weren't very close.
Mm, yeah, exactly. And I think that obviously in the book you did mention that because she was so much older than Parveen, in her late 30s when she was born, so perhaps that's the reason why she wasn't a doting mother, and so on. But do you feel, Krishma, that maybe this broken engagement may have also helped to put a bigger wedge between the two? Do you think that that's a fair assessment now that you look back at it in hindsight? Yeah.
I mean, it's possible, but also, like I mentioned, Parveen was really young, and when we're young,
Right.
our ability to kind of bounce back is a lot
A lot more,
stronger.
a lot stronger, right?
So yeah, so I mean, I didn't get a sense from anywhere else that this particular incident had like a massive impact on their relationship.
Hmm.
Uh, but their relationship wasn't the warmest to begin with.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay, all right, okay, so fair enough. Okay, all right, so let's move forward a little bit, Karishma. Obviously, Parveen wanted to go to college, and I think that back in those days, maybe it wasn't as common for girls to be going to college, but she made a deal with her mother that she would do her 4 years of college and get engaged and get married right after that. But now, after the broken engagement, what was Parveen's next move? After she had her heart broken, because of the broken engagement, and now that she was a young graduate, which way did her life actually take off? Did she go straight to Bombay, or did she go back home? What trajectory did it take, and what exactly was that catalyst that actually got her involved with the film industry in the first place? So, if you could just help us understand that.
So the sense that I've gotten is that none of her moves were really very well planned or planned at all.
Yeah.
She took up opportunities as they came her way. So while she was in college, there was a fashion show. She worked for it. And one of the models that did the fashion show with Parveen was the daughter of a film producer,
Mm.
producer and director.
Yeah.
And so she made that one connection there. At another point, around the same time, she also went with her friends to watch a film shooting in Ahmedabad.
Hmm.
And the director of that film also happened to see her.
Right.
Uh, and so she got an offer for films from both, you know, her friend's father and the director who'd seen her on his set. And so it was pretty much, they offered her films, and she was like, "Why not?"
Mm. Absolutely.
And that's how she ended up coming to Bombay. And she actually, for her first film, there were two directors fighting over her
Right.
in terms of who will get the credit of having launched her. But the first film eventually turned out to be B.R. Ishara's,
Yeah.
called
Mm.
Chandraheen.
Correct.
That which is also yeah. So which also she acted opposite Salim Durrani, who was a
Hmm.
cricketer,
Yeah.
who's also making his acting debut.
Hmm. Absolutely. And of course, our viewers and listeners who are cricket fans would be very familiar with Salim Durrani. In fact, he just passed away, I think, a couple of months ago. And of
Yeah.
course, our condolences go to his family. But yeah, I have to admit that even though I myself am quite the cricket buff, I didn't actually know that Salim Durrani had his roots in Afghanistan, and the fact that he was the first ethnic Afghani to actually represent India at the highest
Yeah.
level. So that really was a wonderful bit of trivia that we got in the book. So Krishna, tell us about Parveen's relationship with another prominent actor director, Mr. Sanjay Khan. And just before you answer that, I would just like to talk a little bit about Sanjay Khan. Back in the 90s, in Bangladesh, we used to have only one channel, the state-run BTV, and Sanjay Khan used to appear every weekend with his show called The Sword of Tipu Sultan. So that was my first exposure to Mr. Sanjay Khan in my early teens. And of course, it was dubbed in Bengali, so we used to refer to him as Sanjay Khan. So later on, when I saw that, oh wow, Sanjay Khan had a very prominent role to play in the early beginnings of Parveen's career. And in fact, even the Time magazine shoot that you alluded to, Mr. Sanjay Khan did in fact have a big role to play in that. So could you tell us a little bit more about the Time magazine cover and the role that Sanjay Khan had with regards to getting her on the cover and how it all came about?
Yeah. So Sanjay Khan, in his book, he wrote his biography, and in that he said that he gave Parveen her break, and that he also told the editor of Time magazine to put her on the cover. What I discovered was that these two claims are not true.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
by the time Sanjay made his film with Parveen,
Hmm.
he had already done, she had already done four other films. So that wasn't correct. And also, as for the Time magazine cover, from what I have understood, Time got a bunch of photographs from freelance photographers in India,
Hmm.
and Parveen's was one of them, which they really liked, and then that's what they used.
Hmm.
So I don't really know how much of a hand he had
Right.
in either of these two things, in of her career. But having said that, yes, they were fairly close. He and Sanjay and his wife Zareen helped her find a home in Bombay when she first moved.
Mm,
They would party together often. They did do films together.
mhm.
So yeah, so I mean, I'm guessing that's what the relationships were. But again, what, one of the things that I realized while researching and writing this book is that all of us remember the same things differently,
Mhm.
and we are always the hero of our own story and
Right.
of our own life. So that, as a biographer, that's like one of the biggest lessons I learned, is that you need to be able to kind of move the story of the person you're writing from the story of the person you're talking to.
Mhm.
Uh, so I'm not saying anyone's lying,
Mhm.
but that, I mean, our memories play tricks on us. We remember things differently. And so one of the one of the things that I did right off the bat was make sure that every story that I was told about her, every characteristic that people spoke about, I would corroborate that with, three or four different people who'd known her at different points in her time.
Yeah.
Uh, just so I am, just so I can tell her story with as much honesty as possible, without letting others' preconceived notions, agendas, their memories,
Yeah.
kind of getting in the way.
For sure, for sure. And of course, Karishma, given the fact that, Parveen is no longer with us, so that was actually my, I just thought that I think now is the right time to ask. It couldn't have been easy, correct? Given that you didn't have Parveen as somebody to interview for the book and to write about her as an arm's length biographer. In fact, you had to rely on other people and their memories as well as all the magazines that you had to sift through for Parveen's old interviews. So, how difficult does it become? I mean, writing a book for a subject who is no longer with us versus somebody who's still with us. So it must not have been easy, given that Parveen is no longer with us. Correct?
It definitely was, because like I mentioned, there are just so many reasons why people say what they say about anybody,
Yeah.
right? It
Right.
could be that you don't like the person, it could be because you're jealous of the person, it's because it could also be just because you don't remember correctly.
Hmm.
Um, and especially with somebody like a Parveen, who just there are just so many misconceptions about her. One
Right.
of the earliest things that I heard from someone who knew her in college and then in school, and then in the film industry as well, was that she started doing drugs at the age of 15.
Mm. Right.
Now Bhuvin was a smoker, a chain smoker, and that's, so that one knew about her. But every time I asked other people who'd known her through the rest of her life, or even college, did you see her do drugs? Did she do drugs? And they were like, no. So
Mhm.
then, after like eight people have told me that she didn't, that one person who told me that she did is
Mhm.
obviously lying for
Right.
whatever reason.
Yeah.
And so that is what makes it like really hard, to be able to sift through what people are saying, while remaining unbiased, but being conscious of, the fact that you're telling somebody else's story who's no longer there to defend or like tell their own story.
Hmm.
So that
Yeah.
responsibility,
Mm.
I felt hugely. And yet I wanted to make sure that I told her story with what's and all. Like I didn't want to,
Right.
uh,
Not to embellish it,
sanitize it
so
in any
sanitize it.
way.
Right. Correct.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So yes, it is hard,
Hmm.
uh, which is also why it took me 3.5 years to write the book,
Yeah.
because research just took like a chunk of it.
Hmm.
But yeah, when I have people tell me, even people who knew her, people who've spoken for the book, or just fans, tell me that it reads like a balanced book. It reads like a book, where they have a greater insight into who she is or
Hmm.
who she was. It just makes me happy. So I'm glad I put in that much effort.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm doing exactly the same with my next book as well. So I guess that's going to be a thing with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we are very curious to know about your next book as well, but we'll get to that right near the end after we're done with the initial questions. So Krishma, with regards to Parveen's personal life, and of course we'll get to her mental health issues as well. But we have to take this opportunity to also talk about the three great relationships that she has had. One, of course, was Danny Denzongpa. The second was with Kabir Bedi, and the third was with Mahesh Bhatt. So, with regards to these three individuals, how cooperative or did they in fact help contribute towards the book?
Oh, they absolutely did. And I don't think this book would have been possible if they hadn't,
Mhm,
because they were just such integral parts of her life,
mhm,
both in terms of career, personal life, and her mental health issues. So
mhm,
I'm just incredibly grateful to all three of them. I barely knew all, I mean, I knew Mahesh, but apart from that, Kabir and Danny, I didn't know that much. So, I mean, even though I'd been a film journalist for that long, so they got pretty much like cold calls from like somebody they didn't know saying, "Hey, I want to talk about like an old relationship."
mhm,
Um, of the three, the one that I was most worried about was Danny,
mhm,
because he just barely ever talks about her. He's an incredibly private person who also barely does interviews. So a large part of this 3.5 years was spent chasing him.
mhm,
And I finally had to, I lived in Bombay at the time, Mumbai at the time when I wrote the book. And I had to fly down to Gangtok, where he lives most of the time, to meet him and interview him. And he was just very, very gracious in talking about her and sharing his stories, as were both Kabir and Mahesh. So yeah, so I'm just yeah, the
mhm.
book wouldn't have been, it would have not been completed if not for those three.
Mhm. Absolutely. And of course, we are definitely, as fans of the book, we are definitely grateful to all three of them for contributing their time towards making it, bringing the book to fruition. And speaking of Kabir Bedi, Krishna, I have to say that my wife and I are also huge fans of Mr. Kabir Bedi. And in fact, we both read his autobiography, Stories I Must Tell. And he, in fact, was in Dhaka very recently, and we both had the opportunity to meet him, to get his book signed, and to even have a huge conversation with him. So I think for us, at least, it was a dream come true because we never would have expected, a huge superstar like him to be visiting Dhaka after so many years. I have to ask, with regards to Parveen's relationship with Kabir Bedi. Of course, he even references your book in his book as well. But then I actually, just like I mentioned during the beginning, that Jennifer, in fact, read your book first before reading this one. I did just the opposite. I read his book first before reading yours, and so I kind of have an understanding of how he's looking at his relationship with
Yeah.
Parveen Babi. What kind of dynamic was it between the two of them? And of course, I must mention as well that Kabir Bedi was in fact married to Pratima Bedi, his wife at the time. But how would you look at it? I mean, was it a good relationship that they had for a good number of years? And what exactly happened that kind of made it fizzle out in the end? If you could help us understand that.
So Kabir's relationship with Parveen, of course, came at a time when he was still married to Pratima. Uh, Parveen was in awe of both of them. She thought, look, you have to remember that she was someone who came from a small town, started learning English only when she moved to college at the age of 15. So she was just always not enamored, but just like, wildly fascinated with people who seemed interesting to her. And Pratima was anything if it was nothing if not interesting, just as a personality. So I think, and they had like a very small group of friends, which Danny, Parveen, Kabir, Pratima, they were all a part of. So they would hang together very often. At some point, Parveen and Kabir, attracted to each other, decided to get into a relationship. Um, Parveen, even, at that time, Kabir's career hadn't really taken off. Career in the movies. He was working in an ad agency and doing really well there. But in the movies, Parveen was a bigger star than he was. At some point, he got offers. He started doing Sandokan. He became huge in Europe, and he decided to move there to set up base there. It was the logical next step for him. And Parveen, this was the first time that she left the industry. She decided that she will also kind of follow him and try her luck in the West. But it didn't work. It didn't work for, I think, multiple reasons. There is the whole deal with fame. It's not easy for two famous people to be together, especially if one is not getting the same level of fame as the other, the same level of respect. And you have to understand, like I said, because she was a bigger star here, but when they went to Europe, it was the other way around, and no one was really focusing on her. So there was that. There was also the fact that Parveen had mental health issues. She was prone to depression. She had schizophrenia, which kind of manifested itself in different ways. So there was all of this that kind of, I think, put a strain on their relationship. And while they were living in London at one point, is when Parveen was like, okay, I'm done and I'm going back. And she flew back to Bombay, and that was the end of their relationship.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think you put it quite succinctly. In fact, exactly what you said is what Kabir Bedi has also said about the relationship that, because she was the biggest star in India, but then in Italy, she was treated like an appendage to the huge star, which is Kabir Bedi, because of the success that he had with Sandokan. So I think it's really understandable that, of course, Parveen would feel a bit slighted to be treated that
Yeah.
way by the Italians and the people of Europe in general. So before I get to Mahesh Bhatt, the third great love in Parveen's life, I just want to take an opportunity to address the elephant in the room, Karishma, if you will allow me. And that is, of course, Mr. Amitabh Bachchan. By the time at the time that Parveen was going through her initial phase of, the mental health illness, and when it was starting to manifest, and it's no secret, it's an open secret that, of course, Mr. Amitabh Bachchan heavily featured in a lot of her monologues and as well as her interviews, where she came up with a lot of conspiracy theories where he was the mastermind or the center of it. So my first question would be that did you approach Mr. Amitabh Bachchan to get his point of view on this whole Parveen Babi saga?
I did, but I have to be honest, I didn't really pursue it as much as I pursued the others who I thought were crucial to the story. Because, again, having interviewed him for over 20 years, one has a sense of what he will talk about and won't talk about.
Yeah.
And so I figured that it was okay if he didn't talk to me.
Mhm. Okay, all right. So it was, so you were happy with, with whatever you got from the other three, and okay, understood. Yeah. So it is quite interesting that I think that personally, I personally, if I could just put my 2 cents in, I probably as a fan would have been interested to know what Mr. Bachchan would have said if he had committed to talking about it. But yes, we have to, of course, respect his wishes as well if he doesn't wish to talk about it as well. So coming to Mahesh Bhatt, Karishma, I have to say that it was after her breakup with Kabir Bedi that she pursued a relationship with Mahesh Bhatt. So, and of course, Kabir was very magnanimous in his praise of Mahesh Bhatt, saying that they're both really good friends and that he was really happy that Parveen found somebody like him, to be in a good relationship with. But even that kind of didn't work out, of course, and maybe a lot of it has to do with her mental illness and the state of mind. But Mahesh did, in fact, do one thing, which was introduce Parveen to a spiritual aspect of her life, which was with the Guru UG Krishnamurti. So, can you help us understand what impact Mr. UG Krishnamurti had on Parveen? And did he actually manage to help her, or do you feel that no, perhaps he kind of put more fuel into the fire that was the issues that she was going with? And just to put it in context, it's because he was actively discouraging her from pursuing her film career. So, how would you, as an arm's length biographer, look at these two dynamics between Parveen and UG Krishnamurti. Yeah.
Before I talk about UG, I want to, with Mahesh, there's what. So I know he gets a lot of flack for having told a lot of her life story from his lens over and over again. But there is one thing that he doesn't get credit for, and that is for having being the first person in her life to recognize that she had a mental health issue.
Mm-hmm.
Um, whether she got help for it or not is a different story, and I don't think like there wasn't much he could do as a boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing he would have had to take a step back. But yeah, he was the first person who recognized that she needed help, medical help for whatever she was going through. Coming back to Yuji, yeah, I mean, I honestly feel that if she had left the industry, if she had not been, if she'd just been easier on herself, she could have had a longer life. Like, she could still be around. Um, because a large part of her paranoia came from from being a celebrity, came from like living living in a fishbowl essentially.
Mm-hmm. Right.
There's an incident that I write about in the book where she had an upset stomach one day while she was shooting, and obviously, so she was going to the loo very often. And because her paranoia was acting up, she kept asking her co-star, "Is everyone talking about me? Do they know that I have an upset stomach? Do they think I'm ill?" Like,
Mm-hmm.
just that level of insecurity
I
that
know.
comes in, or even the insecurity that was there with like just how she looked, where she would start imagining that there were cracks in her face. I feel she would have been able to deal with it a lot better if she wasn't in the limelight. So if only she'd listened to Yuji. But again, what do we know?
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
just a lot
Of
of
course.
what
Yeah, for sure.
ifs.
And I think that yeah, I was actually debating with myself while reading the dynamics between the two. Was Yuji, did he have her best interest at heart, or was it a bit more self-serving? So I think that the way you put it in the book, it does leave it up to the reader to make that judgment. But I'm glad to have gotten your thoughts on it as well. So coming back, circumventing back to Mr. Mahesh Bhatt. Of course, he did make a film about, sort of, about his life with Parveen, and of course, he went on record as saying that, he doesn't have a problem with, uh, you know, taking stories, empirical stories from his own life and putting it out there on screen, so long as it is a good story that will get people to come buy tickets and watch this show. So when you look back at what Mr. Mahesh Bhatt did, and of course you know him personally, you've known him for a very long time. How would you look at that, Karishma? Do you feel that it was right of him to profit from something that was so personal, or do you feel that no, it's just a story, and we shouldn't, it has some basis in the real life, but it is after all a fictional version of events that had taken place.
I think it would be unfair to kind of sit in judgment
Right.
of whether what he did was right or not. But I have to correct you and tell you that he's made more than one film.
Hmm.
He's made multiple films. So yes, the first one was very obviously about their relationship, but even Gangster, which I think was Kangana Ranaut's first film,
Hmm.
uh, is loosely based on on Parveen, like her character is based on Parveen. He's also recently made a web show, or he's making one, which is also Parveen's story. So he's made more than one.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, I can't really say if
Hmm.
it's fair for her to have done this or not.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and of course, we'll take your answer as it is, because we'll keep it non-judgmental, because of course, after all, it is a story, and of course, we should be able to hear as many stories as possible. Okay, so fast forwarding just a little bit, Karishma. Obviously, the first time Parveen left the industry was sometime in the 70s, 1976, when she emigrated, when she went off to Italy with Kabir Bedi. And the second time was 1983 when she, kind of left the industry after a good 10 years and came back in 1989. So obviously, the first time she was able to bounce back very quickly because her movies were doing well and they had just been released. But the second time that she came back in 1989, what kind of Parveen actually, returned from the U.S., where she had stayed for the last 5 years? So by 1989, was she a sought after star, or did she actually fade away by this time? So if you could help us understand
Okay, sorry. So
that.
you got your a little off. She left the industry thrice.
Right. Okay.
Twice when she came back and made, and kind of revived her career. So after she left with Kabir,
Mm,
and came back from London, she left again in 79
right.
because of mental health breakdown, and then she came back in the 80s, in like 1980, to make Shan and Kranti and all of these films. So when she came back, after she left in 83 and when she came back in 89, she didn't work after that.
Mhm. Okay, so she didn't work after that. So in fact, so from 1989 onwards, so of course, she by this time I think that it was just her and her small entourage. So I believe that Ved Sharma was probably still with her manager at the time.
No, so when she came back in 89, she'd obviously been away for like a really long time. She had no career to speak of.
Correct.
Vechana had been managing her, her monies and her properties
Mhm.
in a way, which he handed over as soon as she came back.
Right.
And after that, there was no need of an entourage of any sort because she wasn't really doing anything.
For sure, absolutely. Okay, so just fast forwarding a bit, to 2005. So of course, that was the year that unfortunately Parveen had passed away. And do you find it interesting, Karishma, that aside from the fact that some family members whom she hadn't met, came to claim the body, or perhaps it was in stasis for a while, but the three people who did show up for her funeral were the three people that she had the longest relationships with. Danny, Kabir Bedi, as well as Mahesh Bhatt. All three of them were the only ones from the industry to show up. So do you find that interesting or ironic, or the fact that yeah, these were the only ones who you could have expected to show up because of the relationship that they had with Parveen in the past?
You know, that these three men showed up, when she died, tells me everything that I need to know about Parveen and what they thought of her. Because um, even though there were like fairly acrimonious breakups with all three of them, um, and she obviously wasn't in her right mind towards the end, and all of that. That they still showed up just told me how much love there was,
Mhm.
and how much respect for just the human being that she was. And this is something that I've been told pretty much across the board, whether it was, friends from college, colleagues, directors, um, technicians, her driver.
Mhm.
Like everyone just had really good things to say about her. About how she helped, she was kind, she was very accommodating, she didn't have like starry tantrums. So yeah, I think it's a testament of, them showing up was is a testament of who she was and what she meant to them.
Absolutely, absolutely, and of course, even I think we wouldn't be doing justice to Parveen's legacy, Krishna, if I didn't ask you a little bit about her work ethic. In fact, she wasn't just a pretty face, and that's the reason why people wanted to hire her. But it was, in fact, yeah, and you've made it a point to mention many, many times in the book that it was actually her work ethic that kind of made it, easier for people, for directors to work with her. So, would you like to elaborate a little bit more about Parveen's work ethic when it came to her craft?
Yeah, I mean, just incredibly hardworking. She would, Bollywood is notorious for actors who don't show up on time.
Hmm.
She was one of those who did. I like directors would tell me that she would very often be on set even before they got in because that's the call time she'd been given. She wasn't someone who was afraid to give a scene everything that it required. So to give you an example, there's a scene in Amar Akbar Anthony where her father in the film um, has a bodyguard following her around, and at some point that bodyguard gets physical with her and locks her up in a room. So the I think the bodyguard's character was called Zabigo or something, and so he in one shot had to pull her into a room, and she had to fall on the floor. But the man playing the bodyguard was like a bodybuilder of some sort, and he just yanked her so hard that she fell and hurt herself.
Sure.
And so obviously everyone from Manmohan Desai, everyone who was on set, came rushing to check if she was okay. And she's like, "Don't worry, did you get the shot? And if you didn't, I will do another take."
Right.
So she wasn't afraid. Or I remember Manoj Kumar telling me that for a shot in Kranti, she had to be standing in like a body of water for like a really long time. Till the point like her skin had turned was pruning, and she like he didn't hear her complain at all. Or even they talk about like how if there wasn't enough food, or if they were like pressed for time and couldn't stop for lunch, she'd be like, "That's fine, like I'll eat another time." So she was just incredibly hardworking. The other important thing, that made directors love her unconditionally was the fact that she had a photographic memory. Now, this was a time when they would film on film, which was really expensive. Raw stock was expensive. So the more number of takes you did because you were fumbling with dialogue, the more expensive the film would get. And because she had a photographic memory, that she didn't have to do that.
Right.
And interestingly, while I'm telling you this, I just realized that this is also how her first breakdown happened, when she was shooting a film that never got released, and she couldn't get the dialogues right, and the director started screaming at her because he couldn't understand why somebody, he'd made multiple films with Prakash Mehra was the director, and he couldn't understand why she couldn't remember her dialogues, and so he started shouting at her. And her paranoia was just off the charts at the time, and that's when she left. She ran out of set and went home and had like a proper mental breakdown. So because of her photographic memory as well, she just she was just really loved as an artist.
Absolutely. And of course, even though sometimes the mental health aspect overshadows a lot of her career, I think that you've really highlighted it very well in the book, that she was the consummate professional, and that is the reason why everybody wanted to work with her. And of course, her professionalism just shows up in the book everywhere. And in fact, just the incident that you alluded to, the fact that this kind of a mishap happened, anybody else who would have reacted very negatively to it, but she took it like a pro, and she was one who was actually calming everybody else, saying that don't worry about it, as long as the shot has been taken, that's all that matters. The ends justify the means. So I think that's really well said. So on that note, Krishna, I think, yes, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I interrupted, but there are examples like this pretty much through the book. There was another incident with Hema Malini, the shooting of Kranti, where Hema Malini hit like it was a sword fight, and Hema Malini hit her in a way that her a finger got cut. And Hema Malini was deeply apologetic and wanted to check if Parveen was okay. But Parveen was the one turning around saying, "No, no, no, I'm fine. Like, let's just continue. You don't stress about having hurt me."
Correct. Yes, absolutely.
So,
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And of course, it just shows Parveen's heart, and her heart was always in the right place, and she was the one who was giving solace to her co-star. So that really is amazing. So I have to say on that note, Karishma, there are a couple of staple questions that we have on the show, which we would like to ask you, because we are a podcast about books, so it's in the title. So my question to you would be, do you have any favorite books or genre of books that you enjoy reading? Are you more of a fiction person or a non-fiction person? So what kind of books do you yourself personally like to read?
So I am more of a fiction person. So everything, just everything I can get my hands on, except self-help books. They don't work for me.
Mhm.
But the genre that I prefer, I mean, I go through phases. So I'm currently in a very romance phase. But like the genre that I read the most otherwise is science fiction
Mhm.
or fantasy.
Okay.
Just like really, really enjoy.
Okay, okay, that's wonderful. So, science fiction, fantasy. So you can do no wrong with those two particular genres. So yes. And speaking of which, of course, in the book you've alluded to it many times that Parveen herself was a voracious reader. Reader. So, would you have an idea of what kind of books that Parveen actually liked to read? So, did that show up in your research, for example? What did she like to read?
No, I really wish I could find, the kind of books she enjoyed. I only, so the sense that I've gotten is that it was just a lot of magazines and newspapers that you would read.
Mhm.
I haven't, no one's mentioned particular books that, they found her reading, but yes, everyone told me that she was just always reading.
Wonderful. So I think that we can do no wrong in having a subject who does like to read. So we love people like that who are avid readers, of course. And the next staple question I have for you, Karishma, is something that a lot of our guests have told us that it is an extremely hard question, but I would still like to ask you anyways. And the question is, if you could select a book that you feel that every young person should read at least once in their lifetime. It may or may not be related to the film industry. It may or may not be related. It may be fiction, nonfiction, but something that's edifying and useful. What would be that one particular book that you would recommend that everybody in the world should read at least once in their lifetime? So, what would be your pick?
I'm going to join my voice to that it's a really hard question because it is. I am a big believer in the supremacy of the classics.
Mhm.
So everything from Color Purple to everything Charles Dickens to just Pride and Prejudice, all of that. But if I had to really pick one book, I would say Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Okay.
On the surface, it's just a really, really, really funny book.
Hmm.
Um, but there is a lot of philosophy and just all of that lying there underneath if you want to look for it.
Hmm.
So yeah, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Okay, and I think that's an excellent pick. So that I'm sure a lot of our book lovers, who are watching this episode, will be thrilled to hear about that. So Krishna, just before we're kind of pretty much getting to the end of our episode here, but just before we let you go, if you mentioned that during the beginning that you were writing another book. So can you give us an idea of what we can expect? What is next? Who is the person that you're writing about, or is it another Bollywood star, or is it something completely different? Is there any hints that you can give us about your next book that's coming out?
So yeah, so I don't want to mention who the person is, but I am writing another biography. It is somebody from Bollywood. It is someone who's no longer with us.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but someone who left like a massive, massive, massive legacy as an actor, director, producer. His contribution to the industry even goes as far into the people he introduced to the industry. So yeah, so I'm just very, very fascinated. Yeah, I can't wait for people to read it because this person had a really fascinating life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty much done with research, so I should start writing any day now.
Okay, so you're just about to write. So can I ask how long it might be before your fans and readers can expect the book to come out? Yeah.
I mean, one hopes about a year, but yeah, who knows?
Okay.
Yeah.
About a year. Okay, so we'll definitely, wish you Godspeed with that book, and we can't wait to have it come out. And of course, once it's out, we would love to have you back on the show. Okay, so one final question, Karishma. If your fans and readers wanted to keep in touch with all of your activities, what would be the best way to do so?
You can find me on Instagram. I'm Karishma Upadhyay, one word, and I also waste a lot of time on Twitter. where I'm Karishma U. So that's the other place you can find me.
Okay, excellent. And so we'll have both your Twitter handle and your Instagram handle in the description below. So anybody who'd like to follow you and keep up to date with your activities will be able to do so. Okay, so on that note, for our viewers and listeners who have been with us all this time, thank you very much for staying till the end. And once again, if you are watching this on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon. If you're listening to this on Apple, Google, or Spotify, continue to download. Let me just grab the book from behind me. So the book once again is Parveen Babi, Alive by Karishma Upadhyay. It's a fantastic book written by a fantastic author. So please go out and buy it. And if you haven't read it yet, this is a fascinating read about a very complex individual as well as somebody who ruled Indian cinema for close to 10 years. So yes, it's a life worth reading about. Karishma, my thanks to you as well for coming on to the show. You've been a wonderful guest, and I've really enjoyed talking to you. And we really hope to have you back as soon as your other book is out. And if you have an opportunity to come to Dhaka, I believe you mentioned that you were in Meghalaya, so it's not very far from Dhaka. So we do invite you to come visit our beautiful country.
And thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun speaking with you. And I'm taking you up on the offer. So the next time, I mean, when I'm in Dhaka, I am hitting you up.
Okay, awesome. All right, thank you so much. All
All
right, have a
right.
good day. Bye bye.
Thanks so much.